Hi everyone, this is a short lecture on Caravaggio's very famous painting in Rome, The Calling of St. Matthew in San Luigi dei Francesi, significant church in Rome, and especially significant today because of Caravaggio's paintings on the subject of St. Matthew. Since this is a short lecture, I'm not going to go into the details regarding specific circumstances of commission and so forth. Instead, I want to get right to The Calling of St. Matthew is a really good example of Caravaggio's style around 1600. Here's an image of the painting in situ in the Contarelli Chapel. On the left, you can see the painting that we're going to discuss. In the center, the inspiration of St. Matthew, the angel above on the right, dictating his gospel, and then on the right, the martyrdom of Saint Matthew. You can see here some details of this. Pretty common on the as you see on the left is Caravaggio's use of everyday subjects, or I should say everyday personalities, and oftentimes in everyday situations. In this case, St. Matthew is seen as an older individual, not necessarily particularly polished or refined, standing somewhat unsteadily, kneeling, or at least half kneeling on a stool or chair of some kind, as an angel hovers above him, enumerating aspects of the text that he's about to write. St. Matthew, again, is not seen as particularly, intelligent or cultivated in any sense as he receives the word of God from this angel. On the right is a spectacular combination of figures, really underscoring Caravaggio's use of dramatic, deep, dark shadows and contrasting highlights. You can see if you look very, very closely in the very back, sort of center of the figure, another not uncommon habit of Caravaggio, that's the inclusion of a self-portrait. So again, violence and human figures in dramatic poses here in a dramatically spotlit situation. Again, common aspects of Caravaggio. The main painting that everyone is primarily interested in is this Calling of St. Matthew. The important thing to consider in this particular painting is the role that St. Matthew has as an author of the Gospels, and the moment of his conversion. St. Matthew's former profession was that of a tax collector, and his name was Levi. And in Roman times, tax collectors were relatively disreputable individuals. So when Jesus encounters Levi at a table outside a sort of anonymous tavern, much more contemporary with Caravaggio's own Rome, Jesus is actually wandering into a remarkably dangerous and difficult situation. The closest analogy I can think of today would be an individual walking into a sort of gang headquarters. And you can see on the right, Jesus gestures with this hand posture, very, very similar to a kind of interesting combination of God and Adam from the Sistine Chapel ceiling. That certainly, I think, is a deliberate quote. It doesn't hurt to recall that Caravaggio's first name, Caravaggio is really a nickname. His first name is Michelangelo, just like Buonarroti, but his is Merisi, from the village of Caravaggio. You can look just above Christ to see, somewhat obscuring his halo, really the main concession that Caravaggio has made to the religious nature of this work. Another very typical device of Caravaggio is contrasting lighting is often provided by an overhead source, as though it was coming from a sort of a window in a cellar or something like that. It is interesting to see that window perhaps as a metaphor for religious enlightenment about to occur. The window appears relatively blind, but it's a potential opening, an opportunity for salvation and transformation. If you look at the characters that surround Levi, soon to be Matthew, and let's just go back to emphasize who that might be. It's probably going to be this individual right here, who appears to be pointing to himself. If you look at the characters around him, you can see that they are utterly focused on the accumulation of money and status of a sort. And Caravaggio has, I think, made that clear in this particular figure, who stares fixedly at these piles of coins, though to be sure they're not particularly substantial or tall. And this figure's bright clothing, and in the others you'll see, maybe not quite as obvious with Levi, who points to himself here, but in the other figures to the right, the possession of weapons indicates that these individuals are much like bodyguards. The technical term for them in Italy at the time was bravi, so an individual bravo. Somebody who puts on a pretty significant front of fearlessness and ferocity and violence. So when Christ approaches these individuals, they're quick to reach for their swords, certainly quick to fight. And this is something that's echoed, of course, in, as you read it, Caravaggio's own life story. For the last few years of his life, he's on the run on a murder charge, which stems from an argument over the score of a tennis match in Rome. So Caravaggio was well aware of the kinds of people who populate the streets of Rome, and he really directly portrays them. Really, I think, goes right to the sorts of appearances, attitudes, gestures, the behavior of these types of individuals. Christ, I think, stands in marked contrast, being relatively calm, relatively poised, as he reaches forward in that gesture that, again, as I've already said, is very reminiscent of, and I think deliberately so, reminiscent of a combination of Adam and the notion that Christ was an echo of Adam, sort of revisiting the salvation of man, but also of God reaching forward to awaken the fallen, profoundly fallen Levi. I think that would have resonated with viewers of the time in the beginning of the 17th century. If you look at, let's revisit one other theme here. If we look, for instance, at the figures of the bravi, or this individual right here, or just look at the overall scene, you also get an impression of, besides the dramatic lighting and the sort of plebeian figures, if you look more closely at some of these individuals, you see they betray to some extent, especially, this is kind of a small detail, but let's see if we can find it. If you look, for instance, at the proportions of a number of these figures, you'll see they betray the propensity of Caravaggio to disregard typical academic norms for figure drawing, so that you'll see distortions with regard to figures' proportions. For instance, the figure that we're looking at right here has a particularly large ear relative to the rest of his face, and this will turn up in other situations. Hands are seen as too large or too small, and this probably reflects, as I said, Caravaggio's own rejection of academic figure drawing norms and preparations for painting. It's, I think, not coincidental that, at least so far, there is no extensive archive available of Caravaggio preparatory drawings for any of his many paintings. That is to say, he paints alla prima, directly to the canvas, without a great deal of preparatory study, drawings, laying out the overall composition of his paintings. And this is the kind of thing that for art writers of the period, most famously Bellori, this is the kind of thing that they took him to task for rejecting the idealism of the Italian art academies of the time And Caravaggio, at least according to Bellori, seems to have gloried somewhat in this reputation, saying that if he wanted a model, if he wanted a teacher, nature provides everything that I need, and that he could literally go into the streets and find whatever it was that he wanted. And Bellori takes him to task for too literally transcribing the world of appearances. And in many instances, perhaps not so much in the Contarelli Chapel, but in other paintings, is also taken to task for violating norms of decorum. So a controversial artist in his own time, and running into trouble of all sorts, not just artistic, but also run-ins with the law on various accounts. Nevertheless, he encapsulates for many people our understanding of the Italian Baroque in painting, again emphasizing the expressive potential of art, particularly through extremes of light and dark, and extraordinarily powerful emotional impact.